this morning. We're gonna I'll be presenting one of our ongoing research projects that we are conducting at CERI on opportunities for distributed generation in Canada. Those who just joined us, as I mentioned before, if you do have any questions as we go along, please type them into your questions window, as it is shown here. And then at the end of my presentation, I'll be taking those questions. We have roughly about half an hour of presentation, and then another half an hour for questions and discussion. I hope everyone can hear me well. If you do, once again, if you do have any audio issues, if you're not hearing me, the screen is not clear, please type that in to the questions window, and then we'll take care of it. Once again, those who are joining us for the first time, let me briefly mention who we are. So, Canadian Energy Research Institute. We are a not-for-profit independent energy research institute. We are based in Calgary, but our focus is countrywide. We conduct market-specific studies on as well as energy systems analysis, energy economic studies, covering a whole suite of a very broad set of topics related to Canadian energy systems, covering from oil and gas sector to electricity sector to more integrational studies that we look at the whole energy system as a whole. Impacts of changes to the way we extract or consume energy. Again covering topics related to Canada, as well as whenever it makes more appropriate, we also look at international energy issues as they applies to Canada. So we are founded in 1975. So we are actually celebrating our 45th anniversary this year. In addition to our study, we conduct about 8 studies per year. All are available in the public domain through our website. Starting last year, we also started publishing not just our report, but we also, for every report, would have a very comprehensive data portal where you can access some of our data sets, some of our figures, and then even sometimes make your own figures using our data, using our data portal. In addition to these 8 studies, we also publish a journal called Geopolitical Analysis, Journal of Geopolitics, and then we also publish a quarterly commodity report covering, once again, oil and gas sector and electricity sector. That commodity report is again available through our website. I should acknowledge our main funders. So our 3 main funders are Alberta Energy, Natural Resources Canada, and Canadian Association for Petroleum Producers, or CAP. They are our co-funders, and then in addition to those 3 organizations, we also have both direct funding as well as in-kind support from a number of other organizations. I should also acknowledge Fluoro, the sponsor for our webinar series. So every study, again, every study that we publish would have several in-person as well as webinar, like online webinars that we would present the main findings from each study. You know, as I mentioned, usually we do it, you know, in person, you know, mostly in Calgary, but also we do conduct seminars or breakfast overviews, as we call them, in you know, in Edmonton and other cities in Canada, you know, working with our partners, you know, and also a series of webinars. Those who are attending the webinar today, you will get our slide deck, you know, at the end of you know, likely you know, later today. So the agenda for today, I'm going to introduce this study that we are working on, and then you know, along with the scope and objectives of the study, and then I'm going to you know, cover briefly, you know, the data, and then, you know, the methods, you know, the modeling methods that we are using to conduct the study, and then present some you know, preliminary results, you know, along with some and conclude with some observations. I should mention it is an ongoing project, so we haven't published the study just yet. We are sort of, you know, sort of like a midway point of the project, but we do have you know, some good information that we want to share with you all. So why a study on distributed generation or opportunities for distributed generation in Canada? You know, it is so distributed generation is actually one piece of a more broader set of, you know, technology and operational you know, tools that different you know, many countries, many provinces, many utilities are promoting. You know, it falls under what we call the distributed energy resources, and DER you know, includes, you know, both generation as well as, you know, storage systems, you know, which is becoming going through a very, very rapid growth, you know, Canada as well as internationally. And also some demand side measures, like, you know, controllable loads, you know, but the focus is, you know, we look at, you know, technology and then control options, you know, closer to the final consumer of electricity. You know, the typical utility, you know, the traditional utility is, you know, we would produce electricity, you know, using you know, a finite number of, you know, smaller number of central generation units, and then that would be delivered to the consumers used through a series of a delivery network, you know, a system of the, you know, transmission lines and distribution lines. So it is mostly like a central generation delivered through to the final consumers through a network. That has been the model that we've been using for a very long time. But now there is, you know, a lot of interest on you know, make the final consumer a more active participant in terms of, you know, both in terms of, you know, producing electricity at the consumer point, you know, closer to the consumer, and also, you know, participate in the electricity system in a more active manner, whether it is through generation or storing electricity, or through by you know, intelligently controlling the consumption patterns. And distributed generation is one of the well understood, you know, DER, you know, options or technologies. You know, I should say, you know, you know, the very first one, one of the very first ones that one of the very first DER resources that we've been we started using, we started exploring. And the interest in DG or distributed generation is not new. It has been there for at least for the past few decades. You know, more in some countries than the rest. And then currently in Canada, you know, distributed generation is promoted as a complementary policy to achieve, you know, various energy and environmental goals of the country, both federal level as well as, you know, in provincial level. But integration of, we have a system that we design for that, central generation through, through network delivery method. Integrating higher amount of decentralized generation or distributed generation will bring in challenges, and then some of those challenges must be identified and then quantified. So the main objective of conducting this CERI study is to identify some of those challenges and then try to provide some quantitative analysis around them. Before we get going, what is the definition wise? I think a definition of distributed generation is in order. So this is basically electricity generated at the distribution level or closer to near or at the point of consumption, near the load, whether it is residential or whether it is a commercial facility. The electricity produced at closer to the consumer may meet all or at part of the demand of that point of consumption or the consumer, and with some electricity available to inject back to send back to the grid, send back to the utility. And in general, it makes use of distributed generation, makes use of technologies that rely on local resources. It could be wind energy, solar energy, renewable like wind and solar, or even like another one option we are exploring in this studies. Not just those like a renewable resources, but what about things like natural gas fired CHP, combined heat and power units. So there are a lot of options, and then there are different countries, different jurisdictions are trying out various different options to produce electricity, consume and send back to the grid using different resources. So there are a lot of perceived benefits for distributed generation. And the reason for the promotion of distributed generation is these benefits that different people, different jurisdictions, different organizations have identified, or even different consumers have identified. We kind of split them into three main categories. Some of them would be more like a technical benefits, and then some of those technical benefits would be things like reduced peak demand. I mean, if there's a lot of distributed generation, the peak demand that need to be satisfied by the central system or the electric power system would be lower, because the consumers would produce their own electricity, and that would lower the peak demand in the electric power system. And then it could, if we are building, if there's a significant amount of distributed generation, that could also, we might make it possible to differ some of the larger assets in the total electric power system. The large electric power system, there could be generation assets, or transmission lines or distribution lines. There could be some ancillary service, things like the requirement for reserves could be lowered, or it could be increased. Some of these things, I mentioned them as benefits, but there could be costs as well. And in terms of the one of the technical benefits for why would someone, say a company or a resident household would want to produce their own electricity, one reason could be supply reliability. You have your own supply, so you are not rely completely on the network. You have your own supply. So these benefits may be for those who invest on DG owner or distributed generation, or it could be some of the benefits would be for the utility system or the central system, and then there could be financial benefits as well. That would be due to some of these technical benefits, there will be financial benefits or the economic benefits, or again cost. One main thing is bill savings, and also if you have your own generation, that means you are protected against the price volatility, the potential price volatility in your electricity rates. So that could lead to both bill savings as well as protection against price volatility. And then if you have your own generation, obviously there could be additional revenue. That would be like another secondary income source, a revenue source. And then in terms of the public utility or the central system, if we can defer some of the larger assets or reduce peak demand, that could translate into cost savings for the central system, the central utility. And then there could be other environmental benefits, such as obviously if we produce a large amount of electricity using renewable resources without any emissions, there could be greenhouse gas and other emissions reductions. But there's another thing is electric power system has a big footprint on land, because we build large generation units, we build large transmission lines, and then siting these assets could be very challenging, sometimes almost impossible. So if we have a significant amount of distributed resources coming in, we may be able to reduce some of that land footprint as well of our system. So our study, those are some of the benefits, the perceived benefits. Also, in our study, we we have three main objectives. So the one of them is, like I mentioned, there's a lot of like almost all provinces right now are promoting distributed resources, DER, and then distributed generation, one way or the other. So we want to review, all these DG policies and programs that are being introduced by Canadian provinces, and then we like I mentioned, we cover all provinces. But in today's presentation, I'm going to briefly mention just 4 provinces for illustrative purposes. But at the end of my presentation, I have listed a summary of DG policies and programs of all provinces, so you would still have it. And then we have a DG technology assessments. Again, we conduct, like I mentioned, you produce electricity, closer to the consumer. So then we have to look at, where the consumers are, where we live, so we conduct that, technology assessment by population center, across Canada. Again, we cover, most provinces. And then the technologies we look at in this study, are solar PV and biomass and municipal solid waste as a distributed generation resource, and then natural gas with CHP, natural gas CHP, or natural gas combined heat and power. We are sort of, as far as studies, our progress is concerned, we are mostly completed these 2 parts. So my presentation will cover primarily these 2, and then the third objective is conduct like a cost benefit analysis for both privately, meaning for the DG owner, and then for that one we focus on 4 provinces, BC, Alberta, Ontario, and Nova Scotia, giving a flavor of the whole country. And then also conduct a public cost benefit analysis, again by provincial level. What is, if there is a large uptake of, distributed generation resources, what would be the costs and benefits for the central system or for the whole society in general, or for all ratepayers in general. So we are sort of, wrapping that part up, but the final report, obviously, we have all results, of the cost benefit analysis. So, as far as review of DG policies and programs, so if you, I should mention, a common driver that that we identified, we observed in all provinces. Some of the common drivers are, climate policy, obviously, the greenhouse gas emissions policy, a reduction policy of different provinces and country as a whole. promotion of renewable energy. It may or may not be part of climate policy, but promotion of renewable energy has been going on in Canada and elsewhere for a very long time. And then another objective is supporting local economies. I mean, if you produce electricity and then inject that to the grid and then earn a revenue, that could potentially support local economies, whether it is households or local commercial or local businesses that could support it. And then also if it is a large uptake of distributed generation resources, there could be like another whole new industry installing and maintaining this system. So that could be another derivative benefit of distributed generation resources. And then like another objective, which is this is not very new. I mean, this is one of the main drivers of distributed generation in many countries. This is to enhance electricity access. So for those who have very limited or very sketchy electricity supply, that would be like another common driver. If you are like a rural customer or like a very northern customer where you have limited access to central resources, DG can provide enhanced electricity access at an affordable and while making it affordable. Policies actually differ by technology choice. There are in some provinces there is it is limited to, let's say, renewable energy resources, but in some provinces it's not limited to a given resource. It is technology agnostic. And then is there like a formal procurement method, or it is more like a market-based mechanism? Or they also differ by the compensation mechanism. By compensation mechanism, is it like a fixed feed-in tariff system or net metering or net billing type of a system? So if you look at BC, British Columbia, their net metering program, one of their main DG policies was their net metering program. If you have your own generation, you can get a billing credit through a net metering program. For whatever the energy that you are injecting into the grid, you can get a monthly billing credit. So that's very common in most provinces, in most countries. That have been going on in BC since 2004. Initially, it was limited for about 50 kilowatt of installed capacity, but it was increased to it was double in 2008. And in addition to net metering program, there is another one called standard offer program. This is one of those central procurement method. In case of net metering program, there's no central procurement. If you invest, you can earn a credit, but there could be central procurement. The province or the local utility would say, we would buy a certain amount of electricity from you, through a long-term contract. So BC has like what we call the standard offer program or micro standard offer program that covers any distributed generation from 100 kilowatt to 50 megawatts, and then that had actually brought in a lot of DG into the province. So net, there are about 1,800 net metering customers. There are the total installed capacity is about 13 megawatts. And then about almost most of them, most net metering customers actually use solar PV as their generation technology. And then as of 2018, they have about as part of their central procurement standard of a program, there are about the BC procured about 140 megawatts, 70 megawatts of distributed resources. They are running into some challenges though. So BC, so both standard of a program and micro standard of a program has been cancelled over the concerns on impacts of electricity rates. We'll discuss some of them as we move along with the presentation. And then also BC Hydro has also applied to BCUC Utilities Commission to amend the net metering program, change the net metering program. Again, the limit, the maximum capacity, it is right now about 100, the maximum capacity is 100 kilowatts. And then BC Hydro is now applying, to change that back to like a lower amount. In Alberta, I'll mention about Alberta, and then I'll move on to the technology, assessment part of my presentation. So in Alberta, the two main DG policies, the very visible ones, the most visible one is what we call the micro generation regulation. Again, that is not very new. That has been there since 2008. So micro generation regulation gave the option, enable, distributed electricity production. So if you have, if you can, whether you are a household or a company or commercial operation, micro generation regulation allows you to produce electricity, consume some of them locally, and then even inject some of that to the local grid. So this is the regulation that allowed doing that. And then it was initially limited for up to 1 megawatt, but in 2016 it was increased up to 15 megawatts. But even within that, there are some changes. You will see the all the details in our final report. And then in 2016, Renewable Energy Act, set targets for like a renewable procurement, 30% renewable procurement. 30% of electricity, Renewable Electricity Act required 30% of the electricity that get consumed in Alberta to come from renewable resources. And then that also led to development of a lot of distributed renewable resources. As of last month, February, there were more than 5,000 registered micro generation sites with again, once again, majority of the generation is through solar PV, and the total installed micro generation capacity is right now around 68 megawatts. The Alberta Electric Systems Operator actually would produce a monthly report on the status of the micro generation regulation, how many customers, and then the install capacity and the technology, the type of technologies that they are using. As I mentioned, it's most of them uses solar PV, but there are some wind and CHP and some biomass and then small wind generating units as part of micro generation regulation. Those who have installed that currently. Both micro generation regulation and Renewable Energy Act remain unchanged in Alberta. I'm gonna skip the other two provinces in interest of time. I know I am going a little slower than I hoped, so I'm going to jump into the technology assessment part of our study. Like I mentioned, we are focusing on, in this study, we are focusing on three technologies, solar PV and biomass and municipal solid waste. I'll explain why as we go through them. And then micro CHP. Doesn't mean those are the only options we have. There are a lot of other options depending on your local conditions. There could be, like I said, wind or small hydro, other emerging technologies like fuel cells. if your business allows you to produce electricity using your own like a byproducts, it is supported through DG policies. So our DG technology assessment, like I mentioned, we conduct that by population center, and then the definition of population center is actually consistent with the Census of Population, Statistics Canada Census of Population, from from 2016. So to give you like idea about the type of analysis we have done. So here I am showing all the sites that we looked at in Alberta and BC. As you can see, it covers, in Alberta, it covers, pretty much, the whole province, large population centers as well as more remote locations, and the same for BC. In this particular, and like I mentioned, in BC we have about 90 locations, and in Alberta there are 108 population centers. Each population, we did put a cutoff at any population center that has a population of at least 1,000 people. So that's what we are looking at. But again, if you have a question about any of other locations, we do have a lot of other data that we collected that we can help you out, we can provide, even for other smaller, or if it is like any location that is not covered in our central analysis, but if you do want to get some information about any other location, please approach us through email, and then we do have data that we have not included in our final report. Another thing I should have mentioned, the color represent the resource. So if it is very green, very greener, dark or light greener, that means the solar resources in that location is very like very good. We have excellent solar resources. That's not surprising. For example, in southern Alberta, we have a lot of good solar resources. And then when you go into more like a orange reddish, that means the resources are not that relatively lower, which is the case in parts of like a northern BC, closer to the coast. So this is where it is more cloudier. Why solar PV? Why we are looking at solar PV? Because for two reasons, like I mentioned, for all DG programs, more than 90% of DG units are actually solar PV. And then another one is, this is something that can be installed. These are like a plug and play type systems. Once it is installed, it would run without too much user intervention. It does not need too much maintenance, just a regular cleaning. That's all you need. So this would be, we would think, this will continue to be the dominant DG technology in Canada as well as other countries. And the cost of solar PV is actually declining very rapidly. The cost of when I personally started working with like a solar PV technologies, both centrally as well as distributed scale. This is like early 2000s. The cost of solar PV was something like $20 per watt installed. Right now you can do that for $2 per watt installed. And like a 10%, almost like like an order magnitude cost reduction over a period of 10 years, and then it hasn't stopped yet. It will continue to go. That cost decline path will continue to be there. So here's Ontario and Nova Scotia locations. As for again, Nova Scotia, it covers pretty much the whole province, and then in Ontario too, it covers all pretty much all population centers. And obviously, Ontario is a larger province, so we are covering more locations than others. The same capacity factor figure. So I am showing this is the capacity factor. Capacity factor is let's say you install like a 10 kilowatt unit. How much, what is the amount of time, you would produce electricity. So higher the capacity factor, the better the solar resources. So and then, each column would say how many units. So any unit, any capacity factor that is around like, more than 15%, I would argue that is, given we are like a northern latitude country, it is actually pretty good solar resources. Anything in the order of 15 to 16 range, especially building integrated distributed scale is a very good resource. And then like we are showing here in Alberta, we have very good resources. In Ontario, we have very good resources, and Nova Scotia. BC, like I said, British Columbia, like I said, it is, more like, there is a wide range from like a little bit of like a marginal resources to, some good resource sites. Some cost results. So if we here I am showing, the average cost of electricity measured as, levelized cost of electricity measured in cents per kilowatt hour. So if there is, our capital cost assumption for a residential system is, capital cost would be about, $2.50 per watt installed. And then at that scale, the cost of producing electricity in Alberta would be, less than 10 cents. In most locations, we can produce that electricity, for less than 10 cents. Right now, the retail price of electricity in Alberta is around like a 13 to 16 cents per kilowatt hour. So if you are just looking at, saving some, making some bill savings, obviously it is possible, because you can produce electricity, less than what you have to pay for electricity at retail rate. But that's not the whole story. We'll go through some of them. And then in BC, due to, like I said, due to their resource conditions, the cost is slightly higher. But then still there are sites with, sites that can produce electricity, like at a lower cost than the retail sales. And then, similarly, Nova Scotia and Ontario, you can produce electricity with solar PV at residential scale, for less than 10 cents, less than the retail rate. To give you a bit of a, put that into context, put that into perspective. So we did look at, in all those, population centers, we looked at, what type of households we have, whether it is, detached houses, more like an apartment type building. So let's say if 50% of those detached houses in Alberta, in those 180 population centers, install like a, rooftop solar PV system, not just Calgary, it could be anywhere. The annual energy production would be about 4,000 gigawatt hours per year, or about 5% of provincial electricity demand. So this could actually meet some of the challenges we would will get into with the retirement of the coal fire generating units. Some of that demand could be satisfied with with distributed solar resources. 5% might sound smaller, but it's still not trivial. I mean, it's not. It is still. It can still help us to meet some of the energy challenges we could potentially get into in the province. And you can actually install a solar PV system in like less than 6 months. Oh, I would say less than if less than 2 months. The supply chain situation is pretty good in almost all throughout the country. We also look at commercial scale. Commercial scale, the cost of capital costs would be lower. So I have a typo here. This should be $2. If we hit like a 50 kilowatt system, the capital cost would be about $2 per watt installed. And then in case of larger systems, it could be about $1.50 per watt installed. And then therefore the levelized cost would be much lower compared to residential systems. So for example, in Alberta, you can actually produce them around like just over 6 cents. In most locations, you can produce that for just over 6 cents. The other resource we looked at is actually biomass and municipal solid waste. Once again, we conducted that at population center level. The main benefit of biomass and municipal solid waste is this is like a combustion process. That means you can actually produce, unlike solar PV, you can actually produce electricity when you on demand, when you need it. But the thing is, it is a bit more complicated system, though. I mean, you need more user intervention. You need an operator to keep it going. So you and then we looked at different technologies. So we looked at incineration or gasification techniques, or in case of municipal solid waste, like like anaerobic digestion systems. And then here I am showing the data situation was not as easy as solar PV or reliable as solar PV. So we ran into some challenges, but we still have like a very good, very decent data set that we developed, for most population centers. I'm actually showing 3 locations, like a Lethbridge in Alberta, Penticton, BC, and London, Ontario. So in all those locations, they have like, the supply could support up to like, up to something like, like a 900 to 1,000 gigawatt hours of electricity potential. Significant amount. And then in Penticton, it may be lower. It's a smaller city with biomass. And then with waste, again, it is smaller, but still it can help. I mean, as a distributed resource, it can help. If you look at the cost is actually higher though, because due to the capital cost is higher. And then there is like recurring operational costs, you need a recurring maintenance. So if you look at the lowest cost with biomass was with with gasification, gasify the biomass and then run an internal combustion engine. So the cost would still be, it depends on the capacity installed. So around, if you can, the lowest cost we observed was for something like, like a 5 megawatt system. This was true countrywide, whether you are Alberta or other location. It would cost about 12 cents or so if you have like a 5 megawatt system. That based on gasification, but if it is more for like a steam turbine type system, it would be around like a 20 cents per kilowatt hour. And then the same is true for municipal solid waste. Like anaerobic digestion system had the lowest cost. Once again, it is higher than solar PV, but the advantage is, it is like an on-demand power system. Like electricity, you have, unless you have storage, you actually you have to produce as you consume, and then or you need electricity when you need it. And then biomass has the ability to produce electricity on demand. But solar PV too, you can do that, but you do need storage though. Without storage, you cannot do that. But in biomass and municipal solid waste, our observation, our conclusion is, this is more suitable for more like local business or more like a community level generation, but it would be less. But it could also be doable or more feasible in like a more farms type situations. But doing this in residential scale would be challenging though. I mean, you are busy with your day-to-day life, running your own energy system, burning things and then so on, could be challenging. I'm not saying impossible, but it could be challenging. But also looking at the cost, it makes more sense to do that at a little bit larger scale, like more like a 5 megawatt type scale. So our conclusion is, this is suitable more for like more community, more like a little bit of like a larger units. Not quite residential, more like large facility, large central, like a more community type generation options. I think I'm gonna just briefly mention what CHP would allow to use natural gas in a very smart manner. You would have your CHP unit. There are units that are in from 1 kilowatt high, residential systems to this is nothing new. I mean, we have a lot of cogeneration. A system that would produce both electricity and thermal energy. So micro CHP means you produce power and heat using a single stream of fuel, in case of a natural gas. But you can also do CHP using biomass type resources. But if you look at like a natural gas CHP, there are a lot of technologies, both residential and commercial scale. And we looked at the one thing I should mention is in some provinces, if you did if you have CHP with natural gas, some provincial programs may not allow it as part of their DG program. For example, in Ontario, it is not, you won't get all the benefits of a DG programs, but in Alberta micro generation regulation, you can actually micro CHP would be eligible for the DG program, so the micro generation regulation. We are looking at both residential and then more like a large building situation. So we looked at, if you have like an apartment building with like 100 kilowatt CHP system, the economics looks very promising. I mean, the over a period of like analysis period of 20 years, you would have like a net present value. It obviously pays back in about 10 years. The system would pay back, and you have a net present value of about $45,000. Right? So I want to briefly mention, talking about, so I did talk about the technology, some of the costs that we observed, but then is there a value for that one? So what's the value? Obviously for the final consumer or the DG investor, you can produce electricity at lower than your retail rate. And then there could be, but is there like a benefit for the overall system? Some of the benefits, like peak demand, peak shaving, and then some of the asset deferral, transmission line, generation line deferral, benefits. But the challenge is, estimating those benefits at private scale is actually easier if you invest on DG. The benefit, the financial benefit, economic benefit, or the value comes down to just what is the cost of investing and operating DG. And then what is the compensation mechanism? And or the compensation mechanism says, if you sell power to the grid, how you can get paid? At what rate? What is the mechanism at which you can get paid? And then it comes down to somewhat easy and relatively easy analysis, and easily predictable analysis, like cash flow analysis type. But estimating more like a public benefits or for the value for the whole utilities is actually, it comes down to if there's a larger amount of distributed generation, there could be incurred costs or the avoided costs for the central utility. One of the main things I should mention is I did talk about the network, right? I talked about the power is produced by centrally, and then the network is used to transmission and distribution lines are used to deliver that power to the consumers, and then the cost of that network is recovered through the retail rates. But then if there's a lot of distributed generation, then the way we can actually recover that money through because if so many are used in producing their own electricity, and that means utility may not be able to recover all that network cost or the transmission line cost through electricity rate. So this could be one challenging, and then estimating that is actually quite challenging. It is not easier. There's no like a clear way to estimate this one, but this is something we are currently working on. So like I mentioned, the final report would actually have some of those some of the public cost benefit results. What would be like a loss revenue for the utility, but would that be compensated by the benefits of distributed generation? So that is the plan for the rest of the remainder of the project. So like I mentioned, you will get that through our final report. And then a few other things I should mention. This compensation mechanism design of the compensation mechanism must be done by balancing those costs and benefits, private costs and the public benefits. So the compensation mechanism must be established using by taking both into account. And then, like I mentioned, we will quantify some of them. So going forward, the final report and that comprehensive data portal, it is expected to be published by end of May, end of next month. So please keep an eye out for that one. You all, likely get an email when we publish that one, and then it will be available through our website. So at this point, I think I will take some questions that you have. I've already received some questions. So if you do have if you need any clarification that regarding any of the things that I covered, please type that in. So So let me read the question and then try to answer, the way, as much as I can. So one question I have is BC programs, are all technologies eligible, or are there any restrictions? So thank you for the question, Richard. So in terms of capacity, there are limitations, but it is not too clear though. Are there technology limitations? It appears there are some technology limitations. Between like a renewables and non-renewable resources to use produce electricity at distributed scale. This is something we are trying to clarify. So our interpretation is, if it is a micro CHP, like a natural gas with CHP, it would be eligible. But other things like biomass, I mean, if it is like all renewable resources, they are eligible. But would micro CHP eligible? Our interpretation is yes, they are. But we are trying to clarify that completely. So there's a question by Amit Patel. We saw majority of DG sites are based on solar PV, and then government of Alberta is scrapping the incentives for renewables. How does the impact fees? How does that impact feasibility of new renewable projects? It would definitely have an impact, but I must say, the research that I showed here. I showed you, in here I am showing say, for example, commercial scale solar PV costs. This is without any subsidies. This is just, the cost of producing, cost of installing and operating the system. Yes, it will have an option, but technologies like, solar PV, the cost is declining very rapidly. So this, as I mentioned, this is unsubsidized costs, and then you can produce electricity for around like 6.5 cents per kilowatt hour. So I am hopeful. Actually, I think I am confident. Even without any direct and large amount of subsidies, there's still a commercial like a business proposition here, value proposition here. But it then comes down to, I know I could not complete, I couldn't, cover that in my presentation. So it comes down to, your compensation mechanism. So for example, if you have a solar PV system, like a residential solar PV system, say 8 kilowatt residential solar PV system, if it is like a net metering program at a retail rate of 14 cents per kilowatt hour, your system will be paid back in about 15 years. Your system is good for about 20 plus years, and you have a positive net present value. But if you have like a net billing program, meaning like you only get paid for the energy part that you injected in, then you have a negative net present value, and then the payback would be challenging. But then if the sale rate is actually not 7 cents but 10 cents, slightly more than that, that these are possible, so that's what I meant by, we have to balance, the compensation mechanism by identifying the benefits and then identifying the costs. Like I said, increase if the current energy rate is 7, and then if the benefits of distributed solar PV is 7 cents, I think it is justifiable to increase it for a slightly higher than that. Say let's say 10 cents, and I will actually increase the net present value. I mean, we did some estimate sensitivity. This is with the current cost. The cost obviously is declining, significantly. Things could improve, going forward. So let me take one last question and then wrap up. What is the average time per province for permitting a project? I can speak about Alberta. This has been quite streamlined. It comes down to the type of this, the size of the project. So in Alberta, DG sites do not need to be approved permit individually, depending on the capacity. I mean, if it is like a few kilowatt capacity, we are talking about development times less than 1 year. It can be you basically, the permitting need to be done with your local wire provider. You have to work with your local wire provider, your local utility, in Calgary, for example, in Max, if it is, say, BC Hydro, so you have to work with your local utility, depending on the technology, depending on the size of the project, because, in many provinces, you don't need to approve individual, kilowatt range projects. It could be very fast. It could be like a, few months, time period. So, once again, thank you for your attention. Please keep an eye out for our report that would be published in May, later May. We do have several other events coming up. So the next webinar would be on we just published a report on like another study that we are working on is what is the impact of different greenhouse gas policies that have been implemented in Canada as well as other countries. What are the measurable impact in terms of cost and emissions reduction wise. So the next webinar will be on results from that report. So that will be on May 26th. So which will be very informative and then very interesting thing to listen to. And then we have our petrochemical conference, like our very popular petrochemical conference now under planning. Due to our ongoing emergency preparedness for the COVID-19 situation, the seminar has been deferred to September, from summertime to September. Again, please check out those events on our website. Yeah. Once again, thank you for your time. Thank you for attending. You will get the slides, later today. If you do have any clarification questions, need more information, feel free to reach out to us through email or through our social media presence. Thank you very much, everyone.
I just grab the microphone?
Yes, yes, for sure. Yeah.
How many questions?
8.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because it
Some
looked
are
like,
more clarification.
oh, okay. Because it looked like 44 people joined.
Yeah, I didn't notice that one.
Okay.
Yeah, when I started, so probably around like a 9:15-ish, there were only about 37.
Yeah.
And then people started coming in. Yeah.
Thanks.